Okay, next we move on to book review guidelines. And you're going to kick it off.
This evening we are going to go over some book guidelines that we've put together. I want to give a little bit of context about when this process started. November of 2019, which feels like forever ago, with all the COVID realities that have happened between or since then, we started doing a bit of research around board policy, around books. There's a substantial amount of case law regarding censorship. We also started kind of collaborating across the county with other districts who are also Readers and Writers Workshop districts to explore what their book guidelines look like. And what we started to discover is that they're very few and far between. There are not a lot of book guidelines for Readers and Writers Workshop districts around some of the topics that you're going to hear covered this evening. And so all of that research, due to some books that were coming to our attention in November of last fall, then we started to put together some draft guidelines, really in support of our teachers and really prioritizing ensuring that we have age-appropriate books in front of our students in all the various ways that students access books in our classrooms. So Dawn Hirama is here this evening. She is our district-wide ELA chair. So we have various content area committees that our administrators chair. And so there's a group of administrators, instructional coaches who are very pivotal in some of this work, administrators as well as some various teacher leaders who have met over the course of many months to refine and adjust and put our heads together about how we proceed with book guidelines to ensure appropriate books are in front of our students each day. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dawn. Mandy, I think, has projected, and we'll go from there. Doug, are you going to project? Oh, yes, I sure can. I'll turn it over to you, Dawn.
Great, thank you, Amy. I know you can't see that. Does most of you have it on your screens? So, okay. We'll start. We added this first slide really to talk about the core beliefs of the district, and we're looking at this from really a pre-K-12 perspective around literacy. And this is a core subject for any other subject. We really believe as a district this is one of the most important things we do, and that literacy is always going to be tailored to the individual need of every student, whether they're a kindergartner or an 11th grader. And so this work is really important to be specific to kids and every individual student. One of the things that this core belief talks a lot about is the research behind choice reading for kids. And as an adult reader, I think we can all relate to that. When you get a book recommended to you from maybe your older sister and you think, this is the worst book I've ever read, I can't make it through, and you abandon the book. And we have that all the time with kids as well. And the research shows that when kids take a vested interest in what they read, they grow at a more rapid rate and they're more successful in applying that across the curriculum. So that's a huge piece of this core belief statement. One of my favorite authors in the whole world is Kate DiCamillo. She's a children's author, and she has this quote that reading should not be presented to a child as a chore or a duty. It should be offered as a gift. And in that, we hope to cultivate that kids are excited about reading. The irony of this is my 7th grade daughter hates to read so much. And I can't get her. I can read to her sometimes. I'm still working on that. So just believing does not make things automatically happen. So a big piece of this, Amy alluded to it, is creating a structure for our teachers to help guide in promoting safe choices and appropriate choices for kids, while also creating more engagement and transparency options for parents. So as we kind of work our way through this, the next slide is just a real brief overview of the documents. And I think all of you have received copies of the elementary, middle school, and high school guidelines. And so this presentation tonight is just an overview of all of those documents. But there are different types of reading that happen in a classroom. And so we've broken down the documents all the way across. Elementary, middle school, high school are similar, that there are book types where everybody's reading them, some kids are reading them, or maybe one child is choosing a book for him or herself. So that's kind of the overview of the documents. They kind of follow that same structure. So I'm going to walk you through each piece of that, and then it might be easiest to stop after each type and have you ask questions. You let me know if you want me to keep going, but I think because they're different, and then if I'm going to address your question down the road, I'll just tell you I'll keep moving. So the first big area that we're going to talk about are books that are read to all kids in a classroom. So either kids read them themselves or they are read by a teacher. So you'll see that first thing says mentor text. In our kindergarten through 5th grade classrooms, we have board-approved a curriculum, the units of study, and both in reading and writing, there are books that are maybe a chapter book or a picture book that is connected to a lesson. And teachers typically don't read the entire book, but they're going to read a portion of that book. But they're reading that to the entire class at one time. And those books are part of a curriculum that's already been board approved. Our middle school is currently piloting that same units of study, so that's not yet board approved, we're in that process. But the texts that are used as mentor texts, where they pull a snippet of a chapter book or something out, are part of that curriculum. The next big thing that everybody would read would be in primarily a high school classroom, the whole class novel. We almost never do this in an elementary setting. The range of reading skill is so great that that's not really an appropriate tool to use in an elementary classroom. In middle school, it happens very occasionally, but in high school, and any time that happens, that comes from an already board-approved list. So most of you have been part of that process over the years, and that list has been present. If a teacher were to add a book to that list, he or she would have to have that book approved through the process that's outlined in the high school document to add another book that they would read as a whole group. And then the third thing on here is a little more fluid, elementary read-alouds. And if you have been an elementary teacher or in elementary classrooms, you'll realize we don't want you guys to have to approve all those books. In any first grade classroom, you might read 5 books in a day. You choose books based on what's happening. You're responding to a recess behavior, and you have a favorite book that talks about how to be friends on the playground, and you grab that book and read it real quick before we go back to our math lesson. Those books are books that we're going to ask teachers to use. There's a tool in these documents. There's called a book read aloud vetting tool that really isolates a couple of different factors. This is going to come up over and over again with different types of books, but they're looking at the appropriateness for the context, the appropriateness for the age group of the kids, and what they're trying to teach. And so we're working to trust the professionalism of the teachers, but also have a tool in place that they can run those books through that tool. Most teachers, if it's a picture book, they've already read it. But we're saying, if you're going to read a book to your class, you need to have read it. Read the book yourself. Don't put yourself in the situation where you're halfway through a book and, whoops, wasn't what I was thinking. So there's a couple of features that are all embedded in this to sort of ensure that the read-alouds that are rapidly flowing through an elementary classroom are vetted. There's so many great books that are published every year as well, and our elementary teachers are avid book purchasers, and so we want them to continue to grow their libraries, but also vet those through that tool. So those are books that are read to all kids at the same time. Does anybody have questions specific to that, or should I just keep rolling?
I have some questions. So I received everything Friday night. So I received everything on Friday night, and there's a lot here. So was there any consideration of just having one guideline that would say like mentor text, and this is the process for elementary, middle school, high school, just to condense all this? I guess that's just an observation that I made. some of the questions I had. So mentor texts. So what happens if you talk about how, let's say in the curriculum, we approved book A, but a teacher on their own starts to read book B, but we really don't know that that's even happening. How do we know that the teachers are reading the approved books? And I only bring that up because at previous board meetings, some parents have spoken about some books that have been read, or content has been read at the middle school, and I forget the name of the books, but I was concerned with the book content. And I don't know if they were approved. So how do we, I guess there's a trust factor in this, and I guess my trust isn't where it probably needs to be right now regarding the books. So I guess who monitors the mentor text to make sure that we're reading what's been approved by the curriculum? Because how do we know unless someone tells us that they're not? I mean, is there a list of books that are approved to be read via the curriculum that could be distributed for each grade level? I guess that's one question. I guess I had that question for high school as well. So that was my question for mentor texts.
The short answer is yes. There is an approved list. There's a list of books for high school, in particular of the whole class novels that they use, and then all principals have access to the elementary and middle school curriculum. If a teacher were to swap out a book, say at my building in a 5th grade classroom, they said, you know, I'm really tired of this novel that I'm using as a mentor text. I've read it every year and I'm just looking for a new book to freshen this up for the kids and for myself. That would go through part of these processes. They would have to take it through a vetting tool, talk about it with their grade level team, talk about it with me, and then they could swap it out if that was a mutually agreed upon decision. The idea is that we're not making those decisions in isolation, and then that could then be included on the document that has the list of approved 5th grade mentor texts because it's been through a process.
So if I was a parent right now in the district and my child was in 3rd grade, who would I contact to get the approved list of what would be a mentor text? Do we have that? Where it's coming?
Yeah, you could contact the principal or your teachers in 3rd grade to pull out the list of mentor texts.
It's consistent across the district, so every 3rd grade, every one of the elementaries would have the same list.
Yes. The next area is book clubs, and I think there'll be more questions around this, so we'll try to take this one bite at a time. So the book clubs are situations where students are given the opportunity to select a book to read with peers. So 5 kids read the same book at the same time. And the book clubs really don't start in earnest in this way until 4th or 5th grade and continue on. They're happening in middle school and high school as well. And those books are not part of a set approved curriculum per se. So we're working, right now, we've created a process so that we can give parents more information on the front end and still maintain kids having the opportunity to choose. Because what we don't want to do is take away student choice, because we know the literacy research says that's the biggest impact. So the process looks like this. If I am teaching 7th grade, we're creating a 7th grade book club list. It has the list of 10, 12 books that are going to be offered to students. And there's a vetting tool that you may have seen. It's part of each of the documents. In the vetting tool, there are resources that are live links, and we created a spreadsheet that can go to parents multiple weeks before the unit begins. So they're going to have the book title and author, and then they'll have links to resources like Common Sense Media, which will really encompass book ratings, and each of those things give a age appropriateness level, and then they're looking at sex, violence, language, educational value, and positive messaging. So that parents then can click on that. You get an opportunity, maybe you've used it for the movies. A lot of people use it for movies with kids or whatever. Not a lot of people use it for books, but it's amazing. And you can see a whole summary of the book. It will give you detailed information about the language. So if you click on it, if it has a 1 out of a 5, you can see what the words that you might have questions about. If it's a 4 out of 5, you can see the words that were used in that book. Parents then have a couple of weeks to sift through those things if they choose to, and then they'll be work with their child to list their top, depends on the teacher, she may say, top 3 that you want to be part of. And then if you choose that there's a book that you want to opt out of, parents would then list that book. Like, this is not appropriate for our family. Please don't put my child in this book. Parent signs that and it goes back to school. Teachers then utilize that information, reading level, interest of the students, all the other factors like who can't work in a group well together, who does work well in a group together, in order to make the book clubs. So we're trying to give kids the choice and do all that book talking at school while also informing parents. These are all the books that are even coming before your kids. If you don't prefer your child to read one, you don't have to. An example might be if you have a sensitive student and one of the books in the nonfiction or the historical fiction book club unit has a higher level of violence around a World War II. Maybe you want to opt out of that book. And that would be perfectly appropriate and completely fine for parents to do. And they would know that based on the violence level and the age appropriateness of looking at the tools that we've provided ahead of time. Those will be the same that will be available for all teachers in all buildings. There's some level of difference based on availability of text. So in a 5th grade at Park, I may not have the exact same books as a 5th grade at South because of the history of purchasing books, and these aren't directly tied to curriculum. But no books will go onto that list that aren't collectively agreed upon as the district team. High school, the process looks just a little bit different because of the level of maturity of the student and the complexity of the texts. The student actually chooses the one book, and the parent has to sign off on the book choice before the kids can be in the book room. Yeah.
So a couple questions on the book club. So at the elementary level, the child selects the book. Is there a permission slip that goes home? Does the parent approve it?
That's the process. At an elementary, we aren't using book clubs until the upper elementary, and it would follow that same process. We'd send home the spreadsheet. Parents will get a list of the book titles, authors, and information about each text ahead of time.
What happens if the permission form is either not returned or it's returned and there's no parent signature?
Well, we're trying really hard to inform parents through parent newsletters from teachers, sending home the paper copy. We can email, but if we don't get that back, we're going to do our best to put the student into a reading group that we feel is most appropriate for the student.
And then at the high school level, are students aware of the group placement before the parent signs the permission slip, or does the teacher put them in groups and then gets the permission slip? Because if I had, let's say I had a student and they were in a group of, let's say, 4 or 5, and all of a sudden my mom said, I can't read that book, and now I'm removed out of that group, that student could feel very uncomfortable or be picked on, or...
This is a process that the high school's actually been using for quite a while. So they don't put them in groups as much as the students select their books that they would like to read. And once it's approved, then teachers begin to place groups together.
And then the last one, on this appendix 2, the book vetting key,
Mm-hmm.
there's all these ratings. Are there any ratings that as a district we deem unacceptable to have the book in our classroom or anywhere in the district?
We do have a process for that. We're looking at it's complicated because the book itself may be appropriate in a 10th grade classroom and not in a 7th grade classroom. So we're looking at the age appropriateness of the book, the level of violence, the level of sex, the level of the language being used, and even the readability of the text. So in terms of creating the book lists for the grade level teams, those things are done in a grade level committee where we have lots of trusted educators who have English degrees and are building the lists together. So in fact, we do have books that we've, as a district, collectively said, we're not going to include that on the list. One teacher may say, hey, I want that on my list. We're not going to do that. It has to be a collectively agreed upon decision to join the list.
Are there any, like, for example, let's say a book, like someone brought a book here at a board meeting and it had the F word.
Yep.
Would a book that had the F word be allowed, or would it be automatically excluded according to this vetting key? I'm trying to figure out how some of the books got in.
It wouldn't necessarily be excluded based on the vetting key. If you looked at the several different ratings and we knew that there was high educational value, and there are books that have language for no good reason in them. And sometimes there's a word or two in the book to try to build context and really make a point. There's high value. Again, parents will get that ahead of time, and a parent might say, I don't want my child to see those words or read those words. Another parent may determine, hey, that's a conversation I want to have with my student, and I can see the educational value in understanding how to respond in that situation. So it's not that black and white. This is super complicated. And so we want to give parents that transparency so that, because we have parents who have lots of divergent opinions on what would be the best fit for their child. So we want to put that tool back in their hands and use the teacher expertise to pare down that list of these books have high educational value, and here's what you might want to know as a parent. There might be a word that you don't find appropriate. Please know you can check that out and know ahead of time and opt out of that text.
I agree. I just want to know that as a parent, I would have access to this information.
You do. It will come home a couple weeks before the unit, so you can go through each of the books and determine what's best fit for your family.
Oh, one more comment on the book club. So on Appendix 6, the parent letter for the, that's independent choice reading.
Dawn, if at any time a parent has a concern, I mean, I understand they get the book, they get notification of the book, they can inform the school relative to, I don't want my child to read this book or not. But at any time, if a parent has a concern about, maybe I didn't pay enough attention to it when it first came home, or the titles, but I've learned more, what's the avenue to say, I have a concern, I need to talk to somebody about this concern?
At any time, a parent has the right to restrict their own child's reading. So you could pull your kid right out of a reading group at any point.
But
You would contact the child's teacher and say, hey, this is my concern, I'd like so-and-so to switch to a different book. And we would accommodate that.
Teacher, you can engage
First, start with the teacher. Yeah.
principal,
Yep.
teacher, principal.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
And that is anytime.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions on this book clubs?
Not on book clubs.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I read
That's okay.
everything, so.
Lots of good questions. The next piece of, did somebody have a question that I missed?
No, I don't know what page I'm on.
You are on the right page. So, the next piece is around choice reading, where individual students select a text out of either a classroom library or the building library. And when you look at the documents, one of the things that it's tough as a community member or a parent to realize, like, teachers haven't read every book, and they can't and they won't, because new books are coming out all the time. Teachers have read lots of books, but we as a district cannot read every book in every library. It's just not possible. And so what we're going to name that and say that's just going to be the truth of what's in a library in any school. What we want then to be able to do is to support teachers as they purchase new books for their library with this vetting tool, that at any point, if it's a book you're unfamiliar with, we want teachers to utilize that vetting tool so they can throw that title through the same process, the same spreadsheet that you were just looking at, Barb, and understand the age appropriateness, the reading level of the book, the details of language and any of the violence factors depending on the age level, if there's any sexual content in that book, so that they make an informed decision. We aren't saying it has to be in this range, but what we are saying is we want teachers to choose age-appropriate texts for their school. If the main character is an 18-year-old, it might not be the best fit in a 5th grade classroom. That book still might be a great book, but it probably belongs in a high school library. So there's some flexibility there. But students have the ability to choose texts, and parents at any time, similar to what you had just asked, can decide for their child to restrict what they read and say, this is a book, we don't want my child to read that, and I want you to select a new text tomorrow. This is sort of a simple process for this to say, parents are the ultimate decider for their own child in terms of what they read. It does mean that parents have to take an active role, and part of this is, that's a positive thing. We want parents engaged and participating with this with us as educators and as students. So the more mom and dad know about what I'm reading, the more we can talk about that, the better conversation we have, and the more that becomes part of our family life. That's a good thing. But we aren't going to be able to have intimate knowledge of every text that every student picks up from every library. So this does shift ownership to parents, but they also have access to those tools that are part of the vetting process. So if a parent doesn't have time, which I will freely admit as a mom of middle school and high school kids, I don't have time to read what they're reading, but I can take the book titles that they have and utilize some of these tools to be better informed than I ever was before, so that I can put that book through that process and say, oh man, why are you reading that? Or tell me about this book, it sounds really interesting, what are you thinking about it? And have some of those conversations with the kids.
So I'll just say that I was a bit uncomfortable. It was in all the guidelines, and I know you touched upon it. The wording was, we do not and could not read each book we select for our library, but we exercise our professional judgment as trained teachers to support students as they choose books that will encourage students to read. I will just say I'm a little uncomfortable with that, and I know there's a lot of books. And maybe the teachers have too many books in their classroom libraries, and we need to utilize the media center more. I'm just concerned, do students ever just read a book choice at school and it never goes home? So maybe mom or dad, guardian, they're not even aware of what they're reading. I don't know. I was just, when I read it in all three, for me that made me uncomfortable. I just thought, I just know as a teacher, I would never assign something or have something that I'm not familiar with.
I can appreciate that, and our intention would be that teachers utilize that vetting tool if they're purchasing new books, and in most scenarios, teachers are reading books, but that's also true where we order sometimes 150 books at once from, a scholastic list where we're looking at the reading level, we're looking at the context, we're looking at and in order to put them in the library, we trust the tools that we're utilizing so that we can offer more opportunity for eyes on text for kids. And there are also divergent opinions from families about what they feel is what they want their child to have access to. So what we're hoping to do with a library is create a diverse library and create opportunity that's age appropriate for the students who are accessing it.
I guess as a parent, I would need to be educated on all of these tools. So what is the plan to educate parents on how they can investigate the books that their children are selecting?
That'll
I
come.
don't think most parents would know. I was reading this and I didn't know all this existed.
No, right. I think it's exciting for parents to have access to some of these things. So the vetting tool is more complicated, but I think for parents to, even through school newsletters and teacher newsletters, just to have access to the links, just on a very basic level, gives them a wealth of resources. So those things will absolutely be available to all parents at all levels. Mm-hmm.
And then for Appendix 6, which discusses, Appendix 6 is a parent letter reading independent choice reading. On it, we've got Riley Middle School, their initials in the letter, so I think maybe this letter was focused for Riley Middle School, and I think it's just an example. Okay, just an example, because the same letter was attached for the high school one. And I thought, well, we tailor these to Riley, Baldwin, high school so that they're different for the different.
The intention is that at the beginning of a year, or when this process comes to some conclusion this year, that would go home to all students in a middle school, elementary, or high school appropriate version, so that all parents would then have some information about the district policy on choice reading, have access to some of the resources we just mentioned, and feel like they have a little bit more transparency about what their students are reading.
Does each teacher maintain a choice list for their classroom library that would give like a title and a brief description, or is that too much?
Yeah.
Dawn, I know when our students were in middle school, I believe it was, they were provided with a list sort of at the end of the year, knowing what they might be reading in 8th grade. That was helpful for me as a parent and to be an accountable parent to do my homework over the summer and say, okay, I'm familiar with some of these books. Some of them I don't know. Check them out of the library and read for yourself. Now, that was before the day of Common Sense and all these other tools that we're using. But is that still something they do, or is that something that we could possibly introduce as another option for parents to be able to have that information ahead of time?
Yeah, I think that would certainly be a possibility to share that over the summer, especially at some of those more complex text levels where parents maybe do want to read the whole book.
And for me personally, it was an opportunity for me to have those conversations in the summer with my students and say, you know, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't like that book. And be able to proactively have those conversations with your students.
Can I ask another question about the whole class novels? And I think this is specific to, I think, the high school. It says that full-length books that are to be read by an entire classroom of students are carefully considered. Before a book is required of a student, the book is reviewed by a committee that includes teachers, administrators, and community members. So I was wondering, who are the community members? How are they selected? And then I went further down in the review process. It says this committee, consisting of the ASCI, the Hudsonville High School English Department Chair, 2 or 3 other staff administrator representatives, and sometimes, though not always, a parent staff member who is also a parent. So does that mean that up here we talk about and a community member, but when we get down to the review process, there's not always a community member, because I'm not sure if the community member is a parent. I'm confused. You know,
I know that is really specific to the high school process, which has been in place for a long time. So I'm going to speak to that from my best guess, is that there have been parents and community members involved at times, and other times it has been part of the English department recommending books. And then those books, that's the list that's already board approved, that has come to you in years past. So the committee puts together a list of recommendations for a whole class, and then those books are brought to you for approval, and that's a finite list that's already been there for quite some time.
since we're looking at this policy and these guidelines, is there way to tighten up this language so it's a
Yeah,
little bit clearer?
I think I can see Amy taking a note over there.
Thank you.
Okay, there's two more sections of this. One has a couple slides, but the big topic is donations of books, which is a whole different beast in and of itself. So one area that schools experience donations is from an organization or a group. And this happens not frequently, but it certainly happens where groups drop off texts and want them put in a library. And so we're putting a process in place so that those books are reviewed and then placed appropriately if they are appropriate text for the school. So the first process would be the teacher comes to the principal, would be notified, and they look at a building level committee, looks at the books. There's an appendix that kind of guides that, but it's using the same type of vetting tools. Sometimes we're donated, hundreds of books. So where we utilize the tool then to expedite the process, and then that list is then shared with the curriculum office for final approval. Part of what we know when books are donated, the people donate them don't always know the best age level to donate, so part of that process might be to thank the donors and move the books to the middle school if they're not appropriate at an elementary level.
Who are the curriculum office reps?
It would be, I think we're noting that it would be anyone who works for the curriculum office could serve as a representative on that committee. The second way that there's two other ways that we're talking about donations. One being families donating books to teachers. That happens frequently where someone's going through their home library and they box up 60 books and bring them to school and say, hey, can you guys use these books? We're getting rid of them. We'd rather have school use them instead of just toss them. So teachers then have to use that book vetting tool in order to place any unfamiliar texts in their library. We get a lot of books that we already know. And if a parent donates a book that we're familiar with, that's certainly allowable to just put onto the shelves in classrooms. This last thing with teacher wish lists online, we're putting some more stringent policies in place here so that donations, one thing to note, anything that's donated in this manner is a district property, not the individual property of the teacher. And those books then, before they are put on the list that a teacher would publish, have to go through the vetting tool and then also work with their teammate to determine the appropriateness of the list that would be put out there for purchase by parents, which lots of teachers utilize that tool, an Amazon wish list or other donors choose, things like that.
So I had a question regarding that, and you talked about this. It sounds like this is new. This one's new. So teachers must review lists with content teams, departments, and administrators before posting on public forums. It seems like teachers typically would post their wish list prior to the start of the school year. So are all these people in play over the summer to approve this for it to get posted for families to purchase, let's say, going back to school? Or are these wish lists posted throughout the year?
Both, I think, are a possibility. Teachers might post a wish list around maybe the holiday season or different things like that. Or they may post them before school begins, but they wouldn't be able to do that if they couldn't access their grade level team or their administrator. So if I were the principal, I would expect that a teacher would send their list to me and to their teammates. And if we were in the Upper Peninsula and unable to respond to that, they were on hold until, as a collective, we could approve the list.
Are donated books worth the trouble?
His question was, are donated books worth the trouble?
I get
I think it,
people donate books to me from
Mhm.
they don't read books, and I'm a nice guy, I don't hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
And some of them, I wanna say, you know, really, I don't wanna do this.
I don't-
I don't wanna have staff, administrators taking up time with donated books
Mhm.
if we don't really need donated books.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we, teachers really do appreciate the donation of books for their classroom libraries. It's an expensive and really important feature of classrooms to build that opportunity for choice for kids. So I think if you ask any elementary or really maybe all the way up through high school, like they're so excited to have more books donated to their classroom. So I think we could work around it, but it is something that we value, and it's a nice way for parents to give back to the school. We have a lot of parents who love to do that, who feel like it's a way for them to support their teacher and their school and to be actively a part of that community. So I think the answer is it could go both ways, but it's a nice give and take that is, it's been really appreciated by staff.
Is the media center like going away?
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out what the purpose of what I would call the library or the media center, because I think about the new 5-6 building out, and we have a beautiful media center. But what are we gonna use it for? Do students, I don't know, do students go to?
Students go to the media center weekly.
There's not a media center in the class, there's a book vault.
Book vault.
Book
Sure.
vault, okay, what's the book vault?
Well, we have, depends on your building. Right now, because of space is a big factor for us, but in an elementary building, middle school and high school, we all still have a media center. Students in the elementary go to the media center weekly to check out books, and the purpose of having that access is if I'm a third grade teacher, I have a nice classroom library, but I have far fewer book choices for students to access and read. And this gives them lots and lots of access to books. And so we do continue, like a book vault is a part of our media center, is a lot of space also. So people used to work in their libraries and spend a lot of time in there. We're moving space to other collaborative workspaces and making the book vaults or book rooms a space that houses books versus people working in other things at the same time. They, like the 5-6 building has lots of collaborative workspaces as well. But the books will still be available for checkout.
Do you really need a book vault with all these classroom libraries? I guess that's my question. I mean, I do at the elementary level, kids are so excited when they go to the library, you know, once a week and they check out their books, they love that. But I think about the library media center that's right around here for the high school, that's got all kinds of books in it.
Kids do check out, and I think it's economically, it's financially responsible to utilize that. So if there's 1,000 books available there, every classroom can't have 1,000 books available. So if I have 100 books in my classroom, students still have access to all those other
Because
texts.
I'm thinking if we have all these books in the classroom,
Right.
it would be so much better to have them in the library because you have more access and then there's more books to pick from for everyone.
That seems like a great question. So part of that is in the instructional model. So going back to what Amy Taylor was talking about at the beginning with the way the classroom functions, kids are selecting books. They might go to the media center, but they are continually selecting books. And so if they have to, every time they go to read widely down to the library, that gets really cumbersome. So especially in an elementary classroom or a middle school classroom where kids are reading independently and choosing those books frequently, it's a huge value add to have those available to them right where they are. But we don't want to limit them from also being able to access the library and have more choice.
John, if a book goes through the vetting in one building, let's say it gets donated at Forest Grove, do we capture that knowledge in the district? And do other buildings know that this book has been vetted and teachers have the opportunity to perhaps know what if they were trying to build their library, what books could be grade level appropriate to request?
Yeah, we hope to create a list. Now, I think it depends on the question specifically. It doesn't take long to run a title through the vetting tool, but if we have books that have been approved and like books that are donated and things like that, we will create lists for that. We don't want to create a 10,000 page or item list of all the books that are appropriate, but I think we will definitely have a list of books. The last thing on here is what's the process for a parent who has a concern about a book, and so for that process, once it's completed, if a book has been through that vetting process and through the committees, it would go on to an approved list so that we aren't going through that process in every single school.
Well, because it seems like naturally then the next question would be if there's a concern that comes up and the district determines it wants to remove a book, that we wouldn't want to have to replicate that process by building.
No.
Either, that we would want
Correct.
to be able to say, if we deemed it inappropriate, we pulled it.
Correct. Yes.
Especially in those cases where that might have been a very difficult discussion and a hard discussion to come to.
Yeah.
That's a record that seems really nice.
I appreciate the effort the teachers make to have a classroom library, and that some students are intimidated by the media center. And if there's a teacher who maybe enjoys science fiction, once that student pulls a book off the shelf, more than likely they'll feel like, okay, I like my teacher's choices. Now I feel comfortable pulling another one off. So I think the advantage of that is equally important to having the media center as the go-to place.
Ready to move on to, there's one last slide. So this is more of an official process than it has been in the past in order to allow for concerned parents who come across a book that they feel is inappropriate for the school system. And before going through this, I think it's important to note that we want to be clear that we already believe that every parent has the complete right to restrict what their child reads, but not what all children read, because we do have families with very differing values. And so this process is in place. If you come across a book that you feel is inappropriate for the school library or for the classroom library, there is a formalized process for parents to follow, and they submit their concern to the principal and the team, filling out this particular form that's connected in the appendix, and then it goes to a principal teacher team to review at that grade level and in that building. And if the team agrees that it's inappropriate, it says that the book will be moved. And that means multiple things, because we know that there are books that we might determine are inappropriate at a particular level, but still have high educational value, maybe at a higher grade level. So we might move a text to the high school, for example. It could also be removed. Both of those are possible. And if they disagree, then the book would continue to be used. And we've outlined a process that's multi-step so that if a parent still has a concern and disagrees with that, they can meet with their principal, and then that will continue through multiple steps so that ultimately there's a stakeholder committee, and that does include parents. It's outlined in the document that there are, I think, 2 parents, grade level team, administrators, and then if and when that was still contested, ultimately it would go to the assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction to review all of the work that had been done up till that point and ultimately make a final decision on the book if it made it that far.
And there's no appeal beyond that level.
Correct.
How are the parents selected to get them from?
At this point, we haven't outlined exactly how parents would be selected. So we know that we want to have parents part of that process. And so we had talked about parents who are part of the parent club board, people who are vested in the school. and put, I think, a list of people who volunteer to be part of that process, because it's not going to be an easy job. There you might have to read multiple books and really invest some time.
And I just had one comment, I think it's appendix 4 from the high school, the secondary book review committee form, just because I work a lot with rubrics. So on here we have where you check the appropriate summary box, we have very good, good, fair, poor. How do you rate those ratings? And the same thing where we have no problems, few problems, many problems, several problems. Is few problems like 1 to 3, many problems 4 to 6, several problems greater than 7? I guess how do you quantify those terms when you're looking at the rubric? Just something to think about. You know, as you're very positive impact, fair impact, negative impact. And I just think is when you're rating a rubric, I don't know, just something to think about, maybe quantifying it a little bit better.
Are there other questions?
Other questions, anyone? Comments? From the board? Amy, I know you were taking notes as we were talking through. Can you just run through some of the actions, or things that we talked about that you captured?
Yeah,
Just to make
and
sure
if
we're
I
all-
missed any, make sure to help me out. How are parents selected for the individual, yeah, like. Can you hear me? One of the notes that I have is to review and articulate more clearly in the guidelines how the parents are selected. We had conversation at the committee level that each individual building would get a group of parents together, and so articulate that in the guidelines. Review the rubric at the high school. I will mention that's a rubric that they've used for probably a couple of decades, so a review is likely appropriate, so we can do that.
We use rubrics all the time at the college
Yeah.
level, so I'm looking at that and I'm like, how would we score that when I teach faculty how to grade a paper? You know, when we're looking at grammar. are we
Sure.
looking at 1 grammar error, 3 grammar errors? How do you rate that? So that you're consistent when you review it, everyone is reviewing it consistently.
Absolutely. So that's an action that I have. And then the other one that I noted was add a parent member as part of the review team at the high school. So making sure that that language that Barb was talking about is consistent in those 2 sections at the high school. Are there other actions that I?
Oh, yes, whether or not they would continue that method that they used to have of providing
Oh, the
booklets
summer.
in
Yes.
the spring
Yes.
for the next year.
Yep. So the possibility, I wrote that on a different piece of paper, giving that information ahead of time at the end of 7th grade, for example, what will the 8th graders be reading?
Thank you.
Did we capture everything? Did we miss anything? I'm getting a lot of great information here, good discussion, and thank you for answering all the questions. Also, you guys did a good job of that. But I don't want to leave here and make sure we didn't capture their comments or questions or concerns.
So it sounds like if I'm a concerned parent who just wants to know what the kids are going to read, the whole class novels and the book clubs, those books that are being either assigned or discussed aloud are for the most part on a list somewhere available for parental viewing, with the exception of perhaps the whole class books in the elementary classroom that the elementary teachers are reading lots and lots of whole class books
The
regularly.
read alouds, yes.
But those are in the teachers' libraries in the classroom. The choice reading is something where we're really dependent on the parental relationship with the kids and, knowing what the kids are reading. But there is a clear process that if there's concerns about those books, one, contact the teacher immediately to, pull that book. But then 2, if they're concerned that the book should not be available in the district, there's a process then to bring that to the attention. I think knowing how the process was outlined, I think the only thing that would be helpful
and we will develop a system where all of those books go. So I think adding some language about reporting to the board on books that are on review, so to say, at any given time, or an annual or biannual. I guess we'll have to see how this goes, right? To determine, but we can certainly talk about a timeline for that ongoing review.
And Amy just said there needs to be a process for parent education on how to look up all these scores. You know, because you can look up, there's a lot, in the policy, there was a lot of links that I could click, and I clicked on, but there was a lot that you could look at.
So as an example, there are 2 book clubs that are launching right about now. So 7th grade parents received a letter along with their book list filled out with that vetting key with all those links. So within that letter, then it explains, click on the colored links or those are, look for the colored text, those are links that will take you to more information. And then there's also an 8th grade book club that is launching, and parents will receive a letter if they haven't already. It will be this week. And so that would be similar. They're getting a letter from the teacher saying this is the book club. 8th grade is characterization, so they're analyzing characters. And then here are the books. Teachers are not to add to the list or take away from the list. That is the list. So that is tighter than it has been. So some of the pieces that we outlined this evening have been in place, but many have not. And so most of what you see before you this evening is new.
And Amy, Chad talked about the reporting back to us on the review process. It would be nice, I think, to know too, who were the community members that did that review.
Absolutely.
Especially so we know what building administrators were involved.
Yes.
And what parents were involved in the vetting process.
Absolutely. That was our vision as well. The title of the book, the date the review started, who was on that review, what the outcome was, when it was finalized, and all of those pieces for that historical record. Because if somebody, for example, at Dawn's building proposes a review of a book, and then somebody at Forest Grove also proposes the book, that would be the principal's first stop to say, has this book already been reviewed in the district, and what was the final determination, so that we're not like chasing our tail all the time.
I just want to thank you. I know this was a ton of work. It was a ton of extra time.
It's valuable work. I think the entire committee and our instructional coaches and under Dawn's leadership really feel good about what we have in place. I think that just like anything, there'll be things that come up that we go, ooh, we didn't consider that. We need to process that. So your feedback this evening is extremely helpful with our just different brains. You get so used to reading it over and over in the dialogue that we've had that new brains and eyes on it is really helpful to us. So thank you. Any other questions?
Other questions, comments?
Don, thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate your leadership. It's important work. Our parents want to have a process they can be confident in as well. So I know it's tough work, and just really appreciate your leadership.
Nice job. Okay,